Ralph, we're now live.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to Hertfordshire County Council's Pension Committee. I'm going to announce the COVID arrangements for the meeting. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the County Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. If you experience connection or other technical issues, it may help to switch your camera off. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raise hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours, and we will be taken off after a speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we are voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Other breaks may be taken if appropriate. I'm going to just call out for you the members of the committee. Stephen Bolton, Bob Deering, Steve Drury, Margaret Eves Patterson, John Graham, Adam Mitchell, Vice Chairman, Robin Parker, Seamus Quilty, Ralph Sangster, that's myself, Chairman, and Richard Smith. I think there is one non-voting member in attendance, Paul Mason. Otherwise, the apologies have been received from Joan Lloyd and Stephen Markowitz. The first item on the agenda is to declare, before we take the first item, is to make a declaration if you have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests in any of the items which are going to be discussed. If you do not, then we'll move directly on to item 1, which are the minutes of the Pensions Committee meeting held on the 29th of October 2020. Is there anyone who would like to make any comments regarding those minutes, please? If not, I'll move that they are accepted, and I will sign them next time I am in County Hall. The next item on the agenda is the exit credit policy document, contribution deferral policy. Now, I think there is a minor amendment to the document that was put on or one of the documents that was put onto the website, but I think that's been corrected. The item I think is 2.3. Am I correct? And a date has been inserted in the last line, and I think that was 2020, and it shouldn't be there. But for anybody who has read the report, you may have noticed that it didn't make a lot of sense in its current position, so that's been omitted. I think Matt is going to be contributing to this, so over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So last meeting, members received details of 2 policies that we'd recently drafted, which were an exit credits policy and a deferral of contributions policy. As a brief recap, the exit credits policy was drafted due to some amendment regulations coming into force that put the onus on administering authorities to determine the amount of any exit credits that are paid to an employer when they cease participation in the fund. The deferral of contributions policy had originally been drafted to address the potential impact of COVID-19 on an employer's ability to make contribution payments to the fund. But during our last meeting, it was highlighted that the remit of this policy should be extended to go beyond COVID-19 and be used as an overarching policy that could support employers in the future, as we recognise that employers may run into short-term cash flow issues in the future. Another aspect that was decided at the last meeting, you may remember, was that interest should be chargeable on the deferred contributions. We've updated the policy for this after discussions with the actuary, and the rate that we have specified is 3.4%. This rate was chosen to reflect the assumed loss of investment return from the contributions not being paid on time, and 3.4% was the assumption for investment return used in the triennial valuation of the fund when setting the contribution rates for employers. So we'll therefore review this rate at subsequent valuations and update the policy as necessary. It was agreed that after we made those amendments at the last meeting that the two policies would go out to consultation with our employers for about 6 weeks. We did that, and that ended on the 6th of November. We didn't receive many comments, a couple of minor points on the exit credit policy, which was about clarifying some definitions. The one comment we received on the contributions policy was around ensuring that admitted bodies in the fund should talk to any guarantor authority to get their support before making an application to the pension fund. And we updated the policy to reflect this. So the final policies are attached at appendices A and B, and there is a recommendation to approve these policies. So happy to take any comments or questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Anyone who would like to ask any questions? Richard Smith.
Yeah, this is one of those silly questions, but could you tell me what is a gilt exit basis? That's item 9 of exit credit policy.
So that's when an employer ceases in the fund, the actuary calculates their cessation basis. So they will look at their funding position in the fund, so whether how much assets they've got compared to the liabilities that they've accrued, and calculate an exit based on kind of gilt yields. So that's what that kind of represents.
Are you okay with that, Richard?
So it's government gilts, is it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think the change which has been requested by, I think it was a Section 151 officer from one of the councils in relation to a deferral of a payment requiring the deferree to advise any guarantor of the deferral. I think it's a very wise choice by the Section 151 officer. If I was a guarantor, I think I'd like to know if someone was deferring a payment or not, because I might well be liable for it in the future. So I think it's a sensible amendment to this. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question before I move to the recommendation? Okay, the recommendation under 2 is that the Pensions Committee approves both the contribution deferral policy and the exit credit policy attached at Appendix A and B. Could I ask everyone if they would indicate in the chat line their agreement or otherwise to that proposal? I think I see a number of agreements coming through. I'll just wait for confirmation that that's approved. Okay, we have confirmation that that's a decision in the positive. So thank you, Matt. Item 3 on the agenda is the Risk and Performance Quarterly 2 report, and Anne is going to present that initially. So Anne, are you ready to present?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is the Risk and Performance Report for the quarter July to September 2020. In Section 5, scheme employers are analysed by risk categories. Red risk-rated employers increased by 2 in the quarter, with the breakdown of their ongoing deficit position detailed in paragraph 5.6. The number of employers being monitored under each risk category is outlined in Appendix B. The admission agreement policy has been successful since its implementation, enabling us to maintain a lower number of outstanding admission agreements, averaging 17 over the past 4 quarters, in comparison to an average of 26 in the previous year. Following the drafting of this paper, 3 more admission agreements have been signed. 2 of these fell in the over a year category. Fund officers have continued to engage with employers with outstanding exit payments. The majority of these employers are community admission bodies, such as citizen advice bureaus and housing associations. Our approach is to ensure that all informal payment plans are formalised with shorter recovery periods, and to remind employers who have not been paying towards their deficit that this is a breach of their pension obligations and can be reported to the pensions regulator. Following last committee, the deferral of contributions and exit credit policy went out for consultation, which was discussed in Matt's paper. This receives a positive response from our employers, and we will continue to work together with them to implement these policies as required. The performance monitor in Section 6 highlights the receipt of an unqualified opinion for the fund accounts. Details of complaints and IDRPs are outlined in Appendix A, and LPP's performance against their SLAs continues to be elevated against their targets of 95%. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Anne. Anyone with questions on this report, please? Robin, yes, your question.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can you hear me okay?
There's a little bit of echo, but I think as long as others don't talk, you're okay.
Okay, fine. I just wanted to check about, I think it's page 22. Let me just get it up again. Yeah, page 22 in the agenda pack. And it's about the scheme employer late payments and penalty charges in table 4. Now, I think, if I'm right, I think the details of these late payments no longer come to this committee. I think they go to the pensions board instead. But I just wanted to ask if there are any particular employers which stand out as being offenders in this respect of late payments, and also whether there's been any effect on the number of late payments due to the COVID pandemic. I couldn't see anything in the report, but it's difficult to read, of course, some of these things on the screen.
Anne.
Yes. Thank you, Robin. There has been an increased number of employers that have late payments and send their forms late since the COVID pandemic. What I can do is I can produce some detail for you to inform you of the repeat offenders following this meeting.
Is that okay, Robin?
Say something. Oh, I can just put my hand up.
Okay. Well, I'll wait and see if Robin comes back. Otherwise, any other questions on the report, please? Yes, Bob Deering.
Thank you, Ralph. Like Richard before, this might be a very silly point, but the reference to the Citizens Advice Bureau came as a surprise to me. Could you just explain again the nature of that organisation so far as we're concerned on the Pensions Committee? And is it right that the CAB individuals are getting pension cover through the scheme that we administer or that we oversee?
Thank you, Bob. Yes, the Citizen Advice Bureaus were admitted into the fund as a community admission body. A few of these on participation dating back to 2008 being our earliest one. Some of them began to cease in 2013, 2015. When they ceased with some of them ceased with some deficit amounts that are still outstanding and are still required to be paid to the pension fund.
Thank you very much.
Is there any follow-up on that, Bob?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Ralph. Thank you,
Okay.
Anne.
Ralph.
I see Robin has got his hand up, but Patrick also has. He may want to cover that question, and then I'll bring Robin in.
Yeah, I just wanted to give Bob some additional background. The community admission bodies, such as the Citizens Advice.
Patrick, we've lost you.
Apologies, I was on mute. The community admission bodies came into, such as the Citizens Advice Bureau, came into the fund under old regulations dating back a significant number of years. This is going back to the 90s. And they were allowed admission to the fund because of the nature of the services they provided to the local community. And all they had to do was pass a resolution, and those employees that worked for them could come into the fund, and the fund had no right of reply, essentially. They were admitted into the fund. So these are very long-standing employers in the fund, and as time has moved on, the regulations around the fund have got a lot stricter, particularly around levels of security that the fund requires and guarantors. Fundamentally, the rules have changed quite significantly, and these sort of bodies probably would not get into the fund now. I hope that gives you some further detail, Bob.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Robin, you wanted to come back.
Yes, thanks, Ralph. Yeah, I couldn't get back in. I couldn't demute myself in time before you moved on. It's always difficult trying to manipulate the various screens in front of me. Two things. I didn't hear an answer to the first bit. Is it right that these late payments, details of these late payments, go now to Pensions Board and don't come to this committee? I think that's correct, but can Anne just confirm that? Secondly, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted, was a little list of offenders, if we can use that phrase, and if Anne can send that, I would be grateful.
Thank you, Robin. And yes, the detail of late payments and forms do go to board.
And just hold on a second while Robin turns off his mic, otherwise we'll get a lot of back echo. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, there is additional detail that go to board and committee via LPP's administration reports, which goes to the pension board. However, this does not list out the employers that have offended those quarters. But what I can do is I can provide that additional detail to you following this meeting.
Okay, Anne, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
John Graham.
Chairman, it just builds on a little bit of what we've heard about in this report, because what I'd be interested in on 5.6, where we look at the analysis of the 37 employees, each of them have a different, they're either in surplus deficit or in zero, break even. And I appreciate we're going to get analysis of the 18, but it'd be very useful to understand in which block do they sit, because clearly if they're in the surplus area, we're going to be less concerned than if they're in the deficit area. So
I think that's a very good point, and Anne, I'm sure you'll take that on board.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, you probably can't see me. It would be very helpful. I just think that the report that Anne's doing for Robin, for us all to see, and I just agree with what John Graham said. Could that be in the breakdown as well?
I'm sure Anne will circulate it to all of us or bring it back at the next meeting.
Yes, thank you.
Excuse me. Any other questions? Okay, the item requires us under recommendations that the Pension Committee notes the content of this report. So I'm assuming that we've noted it. I'm not sure necessarily we need to vote on that, but I'm sure Elaine will tell me if I am wrong. Item 4 is the risk register report, and this is being, I've jumped backwards. The risk register report recommendation that the pensions committee is asked to note the comment on the report. That is the one we've just dealt with, and that is the one I think we've all made a contribution on. Margaret, do you look as if you wanted to made a comment?
Sorry. Is it now lowered?
I think it's lowered now. Thanks very much, Margaret. Oh, it's back up again, but I'll let you sort that out.
Doing it by itself.
Okay. The recommendation under 4 was just to note the report and make any comments, and I think we've done that. Access governance investment pooling inter-authority agreement amendment, and there's a mouthful for you. Patrick, that's your item, I think.
Ralph, you've jumped an agenda item.
I jumped another one.
Yes, you need to go back. You've just noted the content of the risk and administration report. The next agenda.
This up. Yes. Okay. The risk register. That's what confused me. This used to be one report, and we've now got 2. So it's the risk register report, and Anne is representing it again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And this is the risk register report for the quarter July to September 2020. We have seen an improvement in the management of pension fund risk this quarter, resulting in 4 risks moving from the amber category to the green category. This has been reflected in the risk dashboard in Appendix A. We will continue working together with the LPP to ensure that the risks are managed effectively and to seek improvements where possible. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Any questions on this one, please? No questions? Okay, again, the recommendation is the pension committee asked to note the comments and comment on the content of the report. I think just to recap, just to make sure that we've covered the comment on the report bit. I think this is the report that now reflects the presentation that Access are using as their risk register report. Patrick, you might just confirm that and just give us a little bit of background on why we're doing it this way.
Yes. So we use a similar format that goes to the Access Joint Committee, but we also have used the corporate risk register that's used within the County Council to inform how we evaluate risk. This risk register was presented to you for the first time at the last quarterly meeting back in September, and it is about essentially making the risks that the fund are exposed to transparent, so that you are aware of these risks and you're aware of the controls that are in place to manage them if they are controllable, and any changes in the risk from quarter to quarter. So you'll see that reflected in the narrative. There is also, as there is an element of subjectivity around some of the risks, and so officers have now agreed that we will have a challenge process before we develop this report for the next quarter, in that we will question how that officer has arrived at that score for each risk. We'll take some inputs from and challenge some of the providers that such as the LPP, who manage the administration of the service, and we'll also take some input from the actuary and the investment consultant as well on some of these risks. But it's an evolving piece of work. This is for my officers and the committee, but it is about making these risks transparent and not sort of burying it in another report, which used to be the case with the report that you saw earlier, the risk and administration report. In that report, to be clear, that focuses in more detail on some of the employer risks. This report focuses in on all the risks that the fund is exposed to. So that's some background and context for you.
Thank you very much. Just ask ask the members if there's any further questions in relation to that comment. If not, then I think I've got it right this time, and that we're dealing with the risk register report, and we're asked to note the content and comment on the report. Where I've asked Patrick to give us a background on that, so I think we've got some extra information, and I'll move on to item 5, which I think I said earlier was the Access Governance Investment Pooling Inter-Authority Agreement
Yes.
amendment. So Patrick, may you take this one forward?
And apologies for the very wordy title to this report. So this report is about the inter-authority agreement that underpins the governance relationship between the 11 councils who are in the access pool for the purposes of pooling investments. The inter-authority agreement was signed off by the County Council back at its meeting on the 21st of March 2017. However, since that initial document was approved, there has been a requirement to review that document to reflect changes in the evolution of access as a pool. And we built into that agreement that after 2 years, there would be a review to see what has changed and to unpick that agreement where we felt that it didn't extend sufficiently enough to cover the operations of the pool. So essentially, the original inter-authority agreement signed off back in 2017 was to get the pool up and running and the governance up and running, and to establish the joint committee, which the 11 chairmen meet quarterly, and to reflect that governance and constitutional arrangement. Since then, the pool has evolved. The inter-authority agreement was established to govern the relationship with Link, the operator. That's been well established now, and that's up and running, and we've got a number of sub-funds established. And in that table in 4.5, you can see the assets under management and assets that are managed under Link. And interestingly, in that table as well, you've got assets managed under UBS under the passive management. Now, the governance of the pool in the inter-authority agreement doesn't extend to that sort of the governance around the UBS arrangement and any other sort of pooling arrangements we instigate for pooling illiquid assets. And so that the agreement needs to reflect that additional governance that the joint committee requires over those other assets that will be established or have been established. Also, there is in that revised agreement, we need to reflect the operational changes, such as the officer working group, which was set up to establish the pool. That's now moved into an access support unit where there is a director of operations, and that's Kevin MacDonald. That needed to be amended, and that reflected in the inter-authority agreement. And also, more importantly, there was no real reference in the initial agreement around the role of the Section 151 officers, who are a key part of the governance and of the access pool, in that they before any papers go to the joint committee, these officers will have a meeting to discuss the content, and they're involved in the terms of business planning and providing advice to members of the joint committee. So that needed to be reflected in the inter-authority agreement as well. Because this is a constitutional document, the Pensions Committee cannot make changes, authorise changes to this agreement without going to County Council. So this, what the recommendation in 3.1 sets out is that the Pensions Committee recommends to County Council that the inter-authority agreement is amended to reflect these changes, and that the Chief Legal Officer is then requested to amend the inter-authority agreement. And on the role of the Chief Legal Officer as well, monitoring officer, all 11 monitoring officers have reviewed this agreement, which was prepared, the changes were prepared by our external lawyers, Squire Patton Boggs. So they've reviewed it and signed off on this, and this constitutional process will take place through the other 10 access funds. That's all I was going to say, Chairman.
Thank you, Patrick. I've got a question from Richard Smith.
Oh, come on.
We heard you for a second there, Richard.
Sorry, I'm trying to Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Richard.
Sorry. at 4.5, I spotted what I call one of these headline claims about delivering estimated management fee savings of nearly £1 million a year. Now, often you find out eventually that it's not quite a million, that there are some costs that are being absorbed by perhaps some of the members. But I think we would want to keep an eye on this over time, just to make sure we really are saving nearly £1 million a year. Thank you.
Yes, I can answer that question, Richard. There's a further report on this Part 1 agenda, the access report, where I provide a bit more detail about those savings. And I acknowledge, yes, we do need to monitor them, and we do monitor them and report quarterly to this committee in that access quarterly update report.
So you can probably pick that up again in Part 2, Richard.
Yes, I can go through the detail there with Richard at that point. It's in Part 1, Ralph. It's the second last page.
Sorry, I thought it was Part 2. Okay, John Graham.
Chairman, just a general question, because I know we're going to talk about access performance in section 7, but I'm looking at 4.5, where the total under access is 25.8 billion. I wonder how this compares with other pooling arrangements. Where do we stand? Because I know we set off, some of the pools set off faster than we did, but we seem to have a good mid-session spurt, and I wonder how we're doing compared to the other pools. Thank you.
Councillor Graham, we've actually passed them by. We are probably I think there is another pool that's got similar assets under management within the pool governance, but we've made a lot of progress, and I would say we're probably 1 or 2 in the ranks of pools, the 6 pools.
Fantastic then, and well done. Well done.
And on that point, we've actually launched further sub-funds, and the assets under management will increase further with Link in when I report in the next quarter.
Grand. Any other questions for Patrick on this item? Okay, it is going to the County Council, should we recommend it. I have suggested to Patrick that Robin and Margaret might want to have a side discussion with him in relation to briefing their various groups, and Patrick is more than happy to do so. I hope when it comes to the council there will be a unanimous support for it. Okay, the recommendation, I think, on which we will need to make a vote this time is the Pensions Committee is invited to recommend to County Council that it agrees the following 2 items, which are in the order paper and on your direct. I won't read them out entirely, but if you'd like to indicate. Oh, sorry, Margaret, you wanted to ask a question?
Sorry, it was just to do with timescales. Ralph, you just mentioned it's coming to Cabinet and then to Council.
It'll go, yeah. I'll ask Patrick, when do we think, which council is it going to come to?
Okay, this will go to directly to Council. It doesn't go through Cabinet. It's a non-executive function, so it goes straight from Pensions Committee to Council.
Yes, I should. Yeah, I should know that.
Do you know which council it's going to?
It's the December County Council meeting.
Council, Margaret. Is that okay?
It's quite soon. Yeah, Patrick, do you mind just talking to us outside this meeting? I think Robin and I would probably like to talk to you, but
yes,
yeah, sooner rather than later if it's December Council.
Yeah, if I send an invite to you both for next week, is that okay? I'll check your respective diaries and find some time. Okay.
I hope that's all right with Robin. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, thanks. That's fine. Yeah.
If you'd like to indicate in the chat line if you agree, disagree, or abstain, please. Just waiting for confirmation. Okay, we've got an agreement on that. Very good. The next item is item 6. This is the Delegation of pension administration functions, Hertfordshire County Council to Lancashire County Council. This is another one that's got to go to the County Council for approval, but Patrick, I'll let you explain the situation.
Yes. Members of the committee, you'll recollect that we've brought a number of papers to this committee, and they're referenced in background papers at the end of this report with regard to the delivery of the administration service for the pension fund. The current provider is the Local Pensions Partnership, which is a partnership between Lancashire. The two main shareholders are Lancashire County Council and the London Pension Fund Authority. The current arrangement is that we have a commercial contract with LPP, and that was extended by this committee back in 2019, and that extension will finish at the end of March next year. Officers have taken to this committee a number of reports setting out the options that were available for the delivery of this function at the end of that contract extension. You'll recollect that we set out three options. One was a procurement of a commercial provider. The other one was the bringing the operation in-house. And the third one was to go into a partnership with another local authority for delivery of this function. You will also recollect that we provided some detailed analysis, which is set out, some of that which is set out in this report, looking at those different types of provision and why this committee, in the context of those two previous meetings in March and November, agreed that this authority should explore the partnership option with the LPP. The main reasons why we didn't explore a procurement process was there was a limited marketplace. There was no providers providing the fire service scheme administration, and that's a key point to note, because the fire scheme falls under the governance of this committee as well as the LGPS. Although you don't see many reports generally with reference to the fire scheme, we do have a separate fire board, and this committee is responsible for the fire scheme as well. So we ruled out the commercial procurement process. The in-house delivery of this service would have involved the establishment of a new team, essentially, bringing in a number of IT systems, and would have come at a considerable cost for this authority. There was no expertise within my current team of officers to deliver this. So the only option really essentially available for this fund, which was supported by this committee, was to look at the partnership option. So we have done some further due diligence with the LPP. We shared, in the absence of committee in late March and June, we shared this analysis with the chairman and vice chairman of the committee and the Section 151 officer, director of resources, that this was the most viable option for the fund, and that the budget had been looked at in a lot of detail and content, and that the option was to go with the LPP, and this was agreed by those individuals. Since then, we've been looking at the partnership agreement with LPP and working through that with our lawyers. But essentially what is now required from this committee is that we need the committee to recommend to council that we can delegate the function, the administration function, to Lancashire County Council to administer this function for the Hertfordshire County Council Pension Fund. We can't as a committee, or you can't as a committee, sign this off, because you can actually award contracts. If it was a commercial contract, you can make decisions on approving those awards. But because this is a change of constitutional function, again, it's similar to the last report, it has to go through County Council. I'm happy to take any questions or comments with regard to the content of the report.
Margaret, you've got a question.
Can you hear me now?
I can, Margaret. I can hear you clearly.
I was just a little concerned. If we are responsible for the fire brigade's pensions, should we not scrutinise them as we do other reports? And I did see a fire brigade report come up actually in my my email, I think, and I'm afraid I didn't look at it at the time because I wasn't sure it was relevant to this meeting. But I just wondered why we don't at least annually review it, and I just wanted to ask you about that and a little bit more about this transfer. Are all the admin costs the same? I mean, is there going to be a more detailed paper about what exactly is involved in transfer to Lancashire for administration?
So if I address the first question, which was around the fire scheme, it's a different scheme to the LGPS. We don't manage any assets directly and don't have investment managers. Essentially, the government provides a grant, a sort of top-up grant. So we will pay the fire pensioners their pension. We administer the scheme, and the shortfall is then reimbursed to the county council in the form of a grant. So there is no assets. You don't have investment managers, and the LPP deliver that administration service. The fire board does get 1 or 2 reports, but generally the agenda for the fire board is very small in comparison to what goes to the LGPS board. Is that fine? Sorry, Margaret, you're on mute.
Could we not see that, just copied into papers that we can read? If there is a report, it goes to the fire board. But if we're responsible for, well, it's probity, I suppose, then perhaps we should see it.
Yes, so we can reference that in the risk administration report, the reports that are going to the fire board, in a similar way that we reference the reports that are going to the LGPS board. The second question was regard to how we pay the partnership. At the moment, we pay a management fee, which is part of a commercial contract. What will happen under the partnership is a budget will be set by the partners, and we will make a contribution in a similar way to how the access pool works. The access pool has a budget which is signed off by the joint committee, and we make our 1/11th contribution to that budget. So the LPP will set a budget each year. They're going through that budget process at the moment. That budget will come to this committee in February with the detail of the contribution required. We will then monitor that budget. They will provide us in a similar way that you would see any budget monitor. You'll get monitoring reports each quarter, and we will obviously have regular dialogue with the LPP officers. We have 2 types of dialogue with them. We have an operational dialogue, which is around operational performance and delivery against key performance indicators. And then we have a strategic dialogue with them as well around setting of budgets, any changes to systems, the way they deliver the service, and that will involve officers like myself, Sally Hopper, who is the Assistant Director for Human Resources, and Stephen as well, Stephen Pillsworth. So we have a number of meetings. I'm on regular calls with my counterparts at LPP, having conversations about performance delivery. So there is a number of sort of meetings that will underpin this relationship in a similar way to the way the relationship works at the moment. The only thing is the funding of it will be different. And with regard to, are we going to pay more? We will. Unfortunately, the nature of how the scheme has changed since we initially went into a commercial contract with LPP has changed quite significantly. We were on the back of a very good commercial agreement, but during that time we've gone through a number of iterations of the LGPS scheme and fire scheme. It's got a lot more complex, and I shared with this committee previously in reports that our cost per head is at the lower scale of where we are compared to our peers, and if we were going to, if the commercial environment was viable, i.e. we go through a procurement process, we'd be paying a lot more money for this. Unfortunately, yes, it's the nature of how the scheme has evolved and the administration complexity has evolved as well, that we're having to pay more for this service going forward. But we will challenge LPP to try and reduce their budget through efficiencies and the way they procure systems, and they've shared some of that detail with us already, how they're going to reduce the budget going forward. Is that okay, Margaret? Sorry, you're on mute again.
So I've just looked at table 2 and table 3 of the report, and as I understand it, is Lancashire the only one that effectively links LPP and does the fire upgrade and can deal with all our admin? Is that what you're really saying, that they're the sort of only one left, or was there a choice?
No, there are other partnerships, such as I think there is the South Yorkshire partnership that can deliver this, but they don't have the number of partners that the LPP does. And through economies of scale, we would expect the LPP over time to deliver savings for, well, efficiencies, not savings, because we're going to be paying more, efficiencies and cost reductions in the budget going forward. You will also see in the report that we talk about a period of notice if we weren't happy with the relationship with the LPP, say, for example, that the KPIs were not being met. We have an 18-month notice period, and you do need that period of notice because of the complexity of moving 100,000 plus member records to another provider. That's another risk that I've flagged in this report. If you move to another provider, there is a risk of corruption of data, and also there is a number of different regulations that are coming out that can, such as McLeod, which we briefed this committee on previously, where we're required to make some historical changes to those pensions. And in taking on board all those risks and the marketplace, the consensus was that the partnership was the best option for this fund.
Have we got tried and tested people who've transferred and know that they're all intact 2 years later?
Essentially, the relationship will stay the same. The only difference will be that we're not under a commercial contract, we're under a partnership agreement, and we'll be making a budget contribution. And that budget contribution is funded by the pension fund and not by the county council. So the money that is paid out to fund this relationship is through the county council, through the fund.
So LPP effectively stays the same. It's just the admin of sort of overseeing LPP. Is that right, or is it the other way around?
It's the legal arrangement. It's a partnership as opposed to a commercial contract, and that is why we're asked. And it's done through called a delegation of function to another county council or another local authority. These sort of partnership arrangements do happen, and it does involve this sort of constitutional change in that a delegation is made through the county council.
Okay, I think.
I will, at Margaret, I'll brief you and Robin on this particular paper as well in advance of county council.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Stephen Bolton.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question. I'm quite happy with this report, but could you ever see a situation where you would want to bring this in-house anytime in the future, or is it just too complex and would be too expensive to do so at any time?
I would never say never, but at the moment, I don't foresee why we would want to take this in-house. And that the reasons behind that we don't have that expertise. We could hire those officers, and you would be looking at quite a big team to bring in. You would also need to get the infrastructure to support delivery of these pensions. So you'd need a special administration system which calculates all these pensions, keeps all these records. We would also then have to develop websites, communications with all the 300 plus employers. It's very complex and would take quite a lot of setup costs to get this up and running in-house.
Okay, so not something we'd take on easily at all.
It's not very easy to deliver.
No,
I think scale is the issue here. The bigger the organisation, the bigger the commitment, the cheaper the unit prices can be, and therefore the more economic it will end up. If we start just administering our own pension scheme clients, the unit rate will go significantly higher because we won't have the economies of scale that this organisation has. Bob and then Steve. Bob Deering and then Steve Pillsworth.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Patrick, I've just got a question on paragraph 9.2, which is page 64 of the pack. With apologies, I'm just a little bit unclear. I'm completely with the approach that's being recommended here, but will it entail significant movement of personal data or not? And if it will, how comfortable are we that we can manage the risk that you quite correctly identify in 9.2? Thank you.
So by essentially remaining with LPP, we don't have that risk. The only thing that is changing, Bob, is the actual legal arrangement of how this service is delivered to the county council. It won't be delivered through a commercial contract. It'll be delivered through this partnership model. Essentially, nothing changes in that the members will not notice any change. Their provider will still be the LPP. The calculations will still be done in the same way. The only difference is the actual legal arrangement on how that service is delivered to the Hertfordshire Fund. Instead of a commercial contract, it will be done through a delegation of function. So there is no impact on or movement of data as a result of this decision.
Thank you, Patrick. Very clear. Thank you.
Stephen Pillsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I was just going to come in and make an additional point in response to Stephen Bolton's question around us looking at bringing in-house. Just to flag, sort of, as a council, we take quite a pragmatic view on this, and we've got some examples where we do just that. And some of you may be aware with the Serco contract that provides a range of back office services to the council. When that expires, we are bringing some of those elements back in. But just as an example, there are some quite fundamental differences between that contract and the pensions administration contract. The first one is Serco actually run those services for us, but they run them on county council systems. So those systems are up and running, we have the ownership, and when they come back in-house, those systems are ready to go. If we were to do something similar with pensions administration, we don't have a system. We would need to go out and purchase that, get it set up ready for data to then be transferred in from the LPP system. And clearly the second issue, which we have obviously touched upon, is something like local government pensions administration is far more complex than payroll that pretty much any organisation would have. So there's sort of some pretty important differences there. But just to give an example of where elsewhere we have made that decision, and to give some background to those reasons why we didn't think it was suitable at this stage for pensions administration. Okay, thank you, Chair.
John.
Chairman, can I just say fully supportive of leaving it with LPP, and Patrick and Stephen have made sort of very valid points about data transfers, but and about how it's much more complex than payroll. But one of the things that always strikes me with pensions administration, it's always very long term, because people are in your pension scheme now and they're going to retire in 25. In fact, I think our latest pensioner retires in the next century. So we're looking at data that you can be going back multiple years. And we know in something like the McLeod judgment that suddenly you get a judgment coming that means you need a new set of data you never even thought about holding when it happens. And if you start moving admin providers, there's always a risk you're losing something every time you transfer it. So I think it's absolutely right that we keep it, and we keep it with the same administrator for as long as possible. So I'm fully supportive of what's coming forward. Thank you.
John. And I think we should recognise that this is a joint endeavour, in so much as we will be seeing the budget. We'll have to agree the budget and the proportion of it. So it's not like a commercial situation where we are given the price and we have to live with it. We are able to influence this and ensure that we are getting the best value out of it. So unless there are any other questions, the recommendation again is the Pensions Committee is invited to recommend to Council that it agrees, and there are two items on the order paper, which I again won't necessarily read out, but I'm going to ask everybody if they would please make their position clear in the chat line and agree or disagree or abstain, please. Just awaiting confirmation, which I've just now received. Okay, that was carried. Thank you. The next item, item 7, is the Access Quarterly Update Report, and it seems that Patrick is going to be presenting that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is the latest quarterly report with regard to access activity since the last report that was delivered to this committee back in September. You'll see under 2.4 that the total assets in pool sub-funds with link Hertfordshire assets are just under 2 billion. And this includes an investment in the Longview Fund, which took place in August. Total assets under access pool governance are 3.4 billion for the Hertfordshire Fund, and that includes the passive assets with UBS. You will also recollect that we've moved 0.5 billion from our passive management with UBS, and this is 3.5 billion of UK index linked gilts to fund the equity option strategy. So that now sits under a relationship with Insight, who is that equity option provider. So in total, we have 62% of assets now pooled, and Section 9 provides some further detail there. One of the earlier reports, I talked about the total assets under management in the access pool, and that's 14.3 billion with link, and that's in 15 funds. We've also got an additional about 12 billion with UBS. Of the whole pool, HCC has just over 14% of the pool assets. I'm pleased to report also that since the insurance issue that was discussed at the last meeting concerning which sort of stalled the launch of new sub-funds, we have now launched a further 4 sub-funds in November and a further 2 in early December. What that essentially means is we'll have 19 sub-funds, a mixture of bond and equity funds, and that gives this fund, the Hertfordshire Fund, a number of options to look at for investment in different styles of equity strategy and bond strategy. And a working group meeting took place earlier this week where we were reviewing some of the bond strategies that this fund could potentially look to invest in. 5.5 talks about the illiquid structures work, and illiquids are illiquid assets are things like private equity, property, infrastructure, and private debt. And my colleagues and I in the Access Funds have been working over the last couple of months to develop these structures. We've got some recommendations that will come to the Joint Committee at their January meeting to sign off. And once those recommendations have been signed off, we can then start the work to procure the managers to deliver these illiquid asset funds for us. This will be a big piece of work, will involve a number of procurements, and will require support from all the fund officers. 5.7 looks at the savings, and I referred to an earlier comment where it talked about just under £1 million of savings per annum. That's based on the difference in costs, fees charged by previous providers and what we're delivering through the access pool now. So, for example, the Baillie Gifford Long-Term Global Growth Fund, you will see there's quite significant savings. If that was to stay under the old arrangement where we had a legal contract directly with Baillie Gifford, we would be paying a lot more in fees, whereas because of economies of scale and investing through Link in a sub-fund and with co-investors, we've managed to drive that fee down. So that's where the access pool is delivering savings. You'll also see there that there has been an increase in costs through the transition to Longview. We moved 300 million into the Longview fund from Allianz, and that was a decision that was made by this committee some time ago. The Longview fund, the fee management there, it costs a lot more than the Allianz fee that we were paying under the old arrangement. It's a different style of management, and it gives the fund additional diversification. There is a paper in part 2 which will go into a bit more detail about this, about Longview in particular. Section 6 talks about the IA amendments, which you've seen in a previous report. The budget monitor position, which is in section 7, we haven't had an updated position, was not taken to the joint committee in November. So what essentially you're seeing there is the reported position that was shared with you in the September meeting. We will bring the up-to-date position in the February meeting of this committee. The Joint Committee of Access Fund chairman will receive the latest budget monitor in January. You'll see under in section 8 that explains how the Access Fund officers are working at the moment. Again, we're still working virtually, having meetings. Section 151 meetings are taking place virtually. The chairman's meetings are taking place virtually. And we're progressing work. So that's the main thing you'd want to hear is this way of working impeding delivery? No, it's not. We're making a great deal of progress. You'll also see there's an investor day, which will be held virtually on the 17th of December, and I'll provide details of who will be presenting on that day to members of this committee. Section 10 talks about the indemnity insurance, which was referred to in the last meeting. That's now been resolved, and we can launch. We've launched additional sub funds since that has been resolved. And finally, the Link. I seem to be talking about Link in every Access paper lately. They're the subject of a takeover, and this is their parent company in Australia. A private equity firm has launched a takeover bid for Link. We are in regular dialogue with them. Does this mean? What does this mean for Access at the moment? Well, until we know whether a takeover is going to actually take place, we're going to continue to work as normal. The sub-fund is the Access operator, and the actual funds they've set up and the assets in them are segregated. They are our assets, and so if there was a change of ownership and Link were no longer going to provide this service, it's Link's responsibility under the FCA regulations to find another provider. The Access chairman are looking at, as part of a review of the operator, as you would do through a contract, we have a midpoint review. We're looking at options of what happens at the end of that contract. Do we extend or procure another operator, or look to develop an in-house option? That's all I was going to say on that report. Happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you, Patrick. Robin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is to do with paragraph 5.7, and in particular table 2. I wonder if Patrick could just say a few words about that, because as I read that, on the right-hand column of table 2, and it's agenda pack page 71, in the right-hand column it lists the annual savings or costs, and some of those are negative savings, 3 of them in fact are negative savings, in other words costs. And I just wonder if Patrick can say a bit more about that, because I understand of course that there will be one-off costs, transition costs, but this looks like an annual thing. Well, it is annual. That's going on, ad infinitum. And I just wonder why we are paying, why we're paying much more in costs to be in access. I thought, being simple about it, I thought the whole point of being in this access pool was to make savings. So can Patrick say a bit more about the negative savings, in other words, the extra cost?
Yeah.
You did touch when you talked, and it does mention it briefly in the paragraph above, but I just need a bit more detail, please, Patrick.
Okay, Robin, so if I start with the Baillie Gifford cost there, which is for the UK equities mandate, when Baillie Gifford negotiated the cost with Link and the Access funds, they gave a sort of overall cost for all the funds that were going to be moved from the current segregated mandates across to the pool. And so we've benefited from the global equities movement, but unfortunately not through the UK equities. That mandate that we had previously with Baillie Gifford for the UK equities had a very, very low fee compared to some of our co-investors, such as the other funds, and they were paying slightly higher costs. So when we moved all those assets under management that were with the funds under separate mandates into the pool, we benefited from the global equity saving, where other funds were paying a lot more, paying a lot less than us under the external arrangements, and but we actually had to pay more on the UK equity. So economies of scale, if you look at it in the context of what are we actually getting out of this from Baillie Gifford, we're getting a 1 million plus saving if you take it in that context. With regard to the Royal London Asset Management, we are the only investor in this sub-fund at the moment. We were paying a very low fee under the arrangement outside the pool, but we were keen to get this mandate into the pool, and we are paying an investment management fee in addition to an operator fee. But as the assets under management grow, and I am aware that there's other funds that are interested in investing in this particular mandate, that cost will become a saving because there is tiered fee rates in there. And so I expect once we hit a certain threshold that the RLAM will be producing a small saving for the pool. The long view cost is the nature of, we looked at this particular manager and the style of investment management, and we agreed that as part of our investment strategy to diversify away from growth equity managers and look at value and quality managers, and we appointed Longview because they were managing a quality strategy. But with that, we were going to pay a higher fee, and that's. But that was we were aware of this when we were moving the assets across. Where we moved the assets from Allianz, 300 million, we were paying a very low rate with that particular manager, which we'd negotiated over a number of years. But Allianz, we are not going to pool with Access. We are going to gradually remove all the assets from from Allianz, and invest it in other Access sub-funds.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick.
So essentially, Robin, we will get some wins. But we'll also pay some increased costs on particular styles of management.
Yes, okay. It's just, when you see a table saying savings and it's a negative there and it's clearly a cost, alarm bells rang, and I just wanted to get a bit of clarification on why that was and where we're going with that. But yeah, thank you, Patrick.
Richard Smith.
Yes, right at the end of the report, under link, you've got this reference to the subject of a potential takeover bid by a consortium of private equity companies. I'm not normally an alarmist, but what happens if they are unreliable and don't have real funds? Do we have any ability to check with, say, the banking system about these companies? It sounds quite scary to me.
So in answer to your question, Richard, Link have appointed financial advisors and legal advisors to do that sort of due diligence of any potential takeover. One of the private equity firms involved is, I believe, is someone called a private equity firm called Carlton, and they're one of the biggest funds in the world. They actually previously owned part of Link, and so they see some benefits from going in to acquire it again. They obviously are keen to buy this part of the business back from Link. It's a Link's holding company is an Australian listed company, and that's where the takeover is being progressed. But yes, we are in answer to your question, we can do some due diligence on those potential bidders, but we are not the body that's being bid for, so to speak. It's Link, and Link will do their due diligence, but we are having regular dialogue with Link officers about this and how this bid is progressing, because we need to understand if there is a change of ownership, what that impact has for the access pool. To be clear, as I pointed out earlier, all the assets that are in that those sub-funds that are managed by Link for us are in the name of those funds that are invested in them. They're the access pool funds. Any change of ownership will not impact those funds. What may happen is we may need to move to another operator if that new owner of Link says, I don't see this as a commercially viable part of that business. And under the FCA regulations, Link would then have to find another provider to provide that regulated service for us.
Richard, I think I can reassure you that the members of the Access Board are all over this like a rash. We've been very concerned, as you might well think, about the outcomes of, or the possible outcomes of this situation, and we're looking at contingency as well as operational changes that might be considered in relation to the future arrangements with this organisation. So we are very, very focused on this one.
So no risk of Chinese funds.
No, I think the money, as Patrick has said, is vested with another organisation, not with Link, and that money is owned by those assets are owned by the individual pension funds, not Link or Access. So the security of those funds are almost gilt-edged.
Yes, I'd agree with that, Ralph.
John Graham.
Chairman, thank you very much. 5.5, the non-liquid assets. Patrick, if I remember when we went into Access early on and you looked at the savings, I think a lot of the savings were coming out of the non-liquid assets, particularly the property funds. And I heard you mention that the Access are meeting again in January for sign-off, but and I noticed in 5.5 there's no sort of time frame for when you'd hope to get the property into a pooled fund. And given that they were the majority of the savings, I wonder what your expectation is of when we might be able to liberate those savings.
So on the property, the funds have been asked as a collective what their preferences are for the first illiquid asset group to look at. And that is property. So once the sign-off, we've had sign-off from the joint committee, we will start to develop the property option. We think that our current provider, CBRE, may be one of those solutions. We've got a number of other co-investors in Access that use CBRE as a property manager. And through Economies of Scale, by bringing all our assets together, we'll be able to drive down significant fee savings there. But also it'll give us some other options around property as well, in that we may be able to do some direct investment in property. And I will provide that detail as and when it's in the next couple of quarterly meetings and the progress to delivery of that.
Patrick, it's worth noting that some of our existing investments will probably never go into Access as a consequence of their long-term position. and until they're unwound, we won't liberate the funds from them for 5, 10, 15 years as a potential position. And the government are aware of the fact that that's going to occur. But where we are able to move it in, we will. But where we can't, then we'll just hold on to them. Is that right?
Yes. Table 4 on page 75 sets out where we are going to move funds into Access and where some of those funds will sit outside. So, for example, CBRE, we've got £428 million with that particular manager. Initially, I'm initially saying it's going to sit outside the pool until the pool solution is developed. The private equity arrangements we have at present, we can't move them into the pool because they are under something called a limited liability partnership. They are very difficult to break up. You're co-invested with a number of other partners, but what Access will do is deliver a private equity asset class for us. So future commitments when this asset class is set up will be done through those Access solutions that are provided in the future. But yes, there are going to be some assets that will sit outside the pool initially, including, and you'll see there we've got LGT sitting outside it as well, and that's because LGT is a very complex mandate, and we'll be bringing a paper back to this committee in February to look at some options around LGT following the discussions at the previous meeting.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Yes, just to do with, I think we might be discussing this in part 2. Are we able to recuperate any of the costs from Longview if they have broken their promise?
Sorry, Margaret, can I stop you there?
Margaret.
Is that part 2?
Yes.
Okay, right. I won't ask that anymore. I can hold that. Further than that, I was just going to the takeover bid. How much say do we then have in whether we agree the company that's trying to take over Link? How much do we as County Council have any say in it? I hope obviously Access do, but does it get brought back to our committee?
No,
yeah, I think
Patrick, I don't think we have any say.
No, we're not shareholders. The relationship we have with Link is a commercial contract for delivery of an operator service. So we would obviously, if there was a change of ownership and they were looking at unpicking parts of that business, we would need to, as an Access pool, have a discussion about the future delivery of the operator arrangement for the Access pool. And as the chairman has referred to already, the joint committee is all over this. They are, and we've had some papers that have been shared with the joint committee around future options. But as this is a public meeting, I don't really want to go into the content of that at the moment. But I can bring back some of that detail for the next quarterly meeting as a part 2 agenda item.
Yes, and I presume there are governance arrangements for this, even if it's not brought back to us.
I think Patrick's already referred to that in yes. So much as the Link are a member of the or have to get I forget the reference.
Isn't it?
That's the one.
Financial Conduct Authority.
And as a member of that, they are obliged to undertake certain functions and commit themselves to doing certain things, one of which is if they want to withdraw from this contract, then they have to find someone else suitable to take it over. And I think do we have a 6-month notice period, Patrick, or is it longer than or shorter than that? Patrick?
Apologies, I was on mute again. We have a 5-year contract. We're just into year 3 of that contract, and we have an option to extend for 2 years. We can terminate that contract early, but you'd have to have real strong grounds for terminating the contract. But the intention is to do this review and come back with some options for the joint committee. I don't really want to say anything further on this because of the nature of the meeting at the moment. Being part one.
We have to leave it in your safe pair of hands, I think. Patrick.
Well, and also the hands of the chairman, because he sits with his co-chairman around the table, and they will make the decision on the future direction of how this, and it will come back to this committee for sign off. So you'll all be involved in the decision process.
I'm interested in the principles of the governance, really. That's all I was, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Bob Deering.
Thank you, Ralph. I just want to come back to table 2 on page 71 of the pack. Comments have been made about this previously, which I completely understand. But I did just want to say that the numbers in table 2, to my mind, demonstrate clearly that what we're doing here with access is extremely good. And I appreciate that some of the numbers in the right-hand column are minus numbers, but when you look at the first plus number, which is £1.3 million saving, simply with one manager, Bailey Gifford, I mean, I think that speaks volumes. So I just wanted to say, you know, well done to everybody for achieving a net saving of nearly £900,000. It's very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions? No. Okay. The recommendation is that the Pension Committee notes and passes any comments on the report, which I think we've done. So we'll move on to item 8, which is Hertfordshire County Council's Pension Fund Carbon Footprint Analysis. And I think there are 2 parts to this, part 1 and part 2. I think the situation is that there are a number of interesting bits of information in this report, some of which is confidential to the provider, and that's why some of it is going into part 2. So I may have to cut you short if you ask questions which are relevant to part 2 rather than part 1. But I think, Patrick, are you going to present this?
I'll introduce it and then hand over to Sandy Dixon from Mercer, who will go through the actual analysis. You'll recollect that we brought a report back to you, brought this initial carbon footprint analysis to you in the September meeting. And we said that we would bring back an annual report to you, or when there's been any significant asset changes, that we would then bring back a further report. This report that you'll see before you sets out the position at the 30th of September this year compared to the previous year. And there's a lot of good news in this analysis that Mercer provided for us. There is some further detail on the managers, but that some of the data and the research is proprietary, and Mercers have asked us to make that detail as part 2. But for transparency purposes and to communicate this to stakeholders and interested parties such as Divest Hearts, we want to have something that we can share with them in the public domain. And this summary, I think, gives that group of stakeholders sufficient detail to see the direction of travel, in that the fund is moving in the right direction. Its emissions are falling and its potential emissions are falling. But you'd also see that in the context of the benchmark, that generally the benchmark has been falling as well. So I'll let Sandy talk about that in summary, and then we can adjourn maybe for a break and then go into part 2 where we can cover the detail. Is that okay, Chairman?
Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Patrick. So as Chairman and Patrick alluded to, we've tried to provide as much data as we can, but we do have limitations, and we purchase the data from somebody, and we have limitations in our contract as to how much we can actually share, because there's commercial sensitivity that way. So I'm just start with page 83, and this kind of sets out what we've analysed. Clearly, we're trying to analyse underlying companies, underlying data for the investment assets that the fund holds. Now, we have good data for global equities, so anything listed, we have good data for. So listed equities, we have good data. We have good data on investment grade corporate bonds. But then other asset classes, especially more private markets and the like, there just isn't that data availability, so we can't do that analysis. So 83 just sets out exactly what we've analysed, and it's predominantly the equities and the corporate bonds, which is about 50% of the portfolio. So we flick over to page 84. This is really the high-level summary of what we've done. You'll recall we did a baseline of where we were. We drew a line in the sand. We learned a little bit about these metrics on the 30th of September 2019. So that was just over a year ago. And this data set now has at the 30th of September 2020. So a year on from our first sort of baseline line in the sand. So on page 84, we'll start with the equity WACC. Now WACC is weighted average carbon intensity. This is a metric, an industry standard metric that tries to allow comparison between very large companies and very small companies, just on how efficient a company is in using carbon for sales and revenue. So on the 3rd of September, the equity weighted average carbon intensity across the whole of the equity portfolio that Hertfordshire has was 138.2 metric tons per $1 million of sales, and that's fallen by about 40% over the last year to 83.4. So that's a really good positive news story for the fund. We actually were quite carbon efficient initially. We were below the benchmark, but we've now actually improved that, so that's really positive. There's a similar story on the corporate bonds as well. The intensity, so the amount of carbon that is produced per annum, has decreased by about 33% over the year. And the last one, so those two metrics, or WACC, is the ongoing, so how much carbon is being produced every single year by the companies you invest in. So it's actually what's being pumped out. The right-hand side on page 84 is what are the potential emissions. So this is a crude metric to basically go, what are our fossil fuel reserves? So how much fossil fuels do our companies that we invest in hold? And you can see that's had a real huge drop, 64% over the last year, which is really positive. And so there's a couple of reasons why these metrics have been fallen over the year. First of all, just in general, the market and the indexes have all fallen down. So even if you invested passively, held just what the market had, these have come down. But there's actually been a couple of things that the pension fund and the committee have agreed to strategically that's helped in this journey. So first of all, the disinvestment from some UK passive equities, the UBS, and investing that in the global climate aware, that's helped both the equity carbon intensity, but also the potential emissions, just with the UK equity market is quite heavy in fossil fuels. So moving out of the UK into the global climate aware really helped on that regard. And then secondly, moving from Allianz to Longview. Longview have actually got a lower carbon intensity than Allianz, but I won't go into too much detail on that. So if you flick over to page 85 in the pack, this just shows and tracks the weighted average carbon intensity of the portfolio from our baseline, 30 September 2019. It shows the intermediate stage at 31st of March 2020, which sort of aligns with the accounts of the pension fund, and then also 30 September 2020. So you can see it's a good trend. A representative global equity benchmark would have fallen about 20% over the year. Now that was really caused by, with the COVID pandemic, technology stocks rallied quite hard, airlines and the like, which are slightly more carbon intensive, fell quite a lot. So it's really just more market dynamics was causing that 20%. So it's really pleasing to see that the funds listed portfolio actually fell by a greater amount, so about 40%. So that just shows that you had an efficient portfolio initially, because on 30 September 2019, our weighted average intensity was lower than the benchmark, and that's fallen at a faster rate than the benchmark. So that's really quite a positive news story. And then just on to page 86, which then is potential emissions. So this is basically our fossil fuel reserves estimate. We did our baseline on 30 September 2019. The fund was pretty much in line, slightly below a representative benchmark, but pretty much in line. So fairly significant fossil fuel reserves there. You can see over the last year, the work and the decisions by the pension fund and officers behind the scenes has really driven that down quite low. So that's probably the most positive news story, that the listed equity portfolio fossil fuel reserves have fallen by 65% nearly over the last year. So that's very positive. As the chairman and Patrick said, we've got lots of underlying data in part 2, which we can discuss if you want. But this is just a high level summary, really just to demonstrate to all interested parties what the pension fund has done over the last year.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Adam, you have a question?
Yeah, it's a part one question. This is a very good news story, and we should be proud of these results, even though they are early results. But I was wondering if perhaps we were to put out a press release that perhaps could be shared on social media, you might get a sort of wider audience than if you just left these figures in a report. And I'm not talking about putting the part 2 data out or anything like that, but just perhaps the headline figures in slide 5 and 6 as a short press release that can be easily passed about might be an idea. And I just wondered if anyone's got any comment on that.
I think as an objective, Adam, I think it's a very good one. I think we'd have to investigate how best we can do that, given that the Pensions Committee doesn't necessarily sit within the Herts County Council publicity machine. Patrick, perhaps you could advise on what we might consider doing here, or looking at where we can perhaps make this a little bit more visual.
I suppose one way that we could do this is by, in our annual report, put in a statement on how the fund's footprint has moved over a period such as a financial year, and we've got that data now, so we can put something into the fund report to say that. Ralph, you, members may not be aware, but Ralph did a recent interview with Pensions Age, which was published in October, which that a journalist asked us a number of questions about how we were approaching responsible investments and what we were doing to measure and report on how our position was evolving with time. And I can share that article with members of the committee. And that was published in October. But I think a good place for this at the moment would be potentially putting it in the fund accounts. It's difficult because do we use the Hertfordshire website to broadcast pension fund news? I'm not sure. I could take this up with communications.
Could I just come back very briefly? It's just that, you know, as a county councillor, I do receive emails about this from various different groups. So, you know, whether or not there must be a way to do this so that those sort of questions and queries that I get from these interest groups could be answered almost before they send the email to me. I mean, this is a good news story, and I think we really do need to show that we are making progress in the right direction here.
Patrick, I think we Access have a communication strategy, which I think they've been working on, and includes ensuring that we get Access's message out to those who are interested in its performance. And I guess there's a parallel here with our own performance, and I think merely just waiting for the annual report is probably leaving it too late. I think I think we probably need to have a conversation with the comms team and see what platforms there are available to us to publicise this. I know Robin in the past has been very keen for us to be more open with the successes that we've had. So I'm sure he's going to make a comment in a minute, because I'm going to call upon him to do so. But I think we should look at this as an opportunity to make a little bit more of a splash in our various comms platforms than merely waiting for the annual report.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, I'll take that with corporate comms.
Yeah, Robin.
Yes, thanks, Chair. My question or points are also part one. Yes, you're right, I have spoken on this in the past. I'm particularly keen to make it clear that when an organisation like us hold equities in a given company, we're not giving resources to that company. Indeed, we're taking an income from that company. And therefore, whether we should hold equity shares in a fossil fuel company comes down to the moral issue of whether we wish to be taking an income from a company that's making its money and giving us profits, or a share of those profits, from pumping carbon into the atmosphere. That's the overall point. It comes down to an issue of whether we think it's right, and most of us don't, I think, to be taking income from a company that's doing a lot of environmental damage. My question actually, though, to Sandy is, looking at page 84 of the agenda pack, and those charts showing how well we're doing and how the emissions have dropped in the last year. I'm just a bit cautious because I think I'm right in saying that some of that, or quite a lot of that drop in carbon emissions by our portfolio is due to the fact that Bailey Gifford reduced or stopped, in fact, investing in RDSB during the year for commercial reasons, presumably because they could see what might happen to RDSB shares during the year, and indeed they've been proved right in that. So can Sandy say how much of that reduction is actually due to positive moves by the companies involved, and how much is just due to the fact that Bailey Gifford made a commercial decision to disinvest in RDSB because they could see the writing on the wall, at least for the next 12 months?
So to answer your point, Robert, if you look at
just hold on a second, Sandy. Let Peter, let Robin turn his mic off, and then you won't get the feedback. Okay.
So if you look on page 85, Robin, you'll see that just global equities in general, just looking at the equities, the WACC on equities reduced by 20%. So that's just the market. So if we just invested passively along the market and did absolutely nothing, and our managers didn't do anything, then it would reduce by 20%. Now the fund's listed portfolio is actually fallen by nearly 40%, so that's almost a double reduction. Now part of that will be Bailey Gifford in the UK portfolio and restructuring there, and part of it is actually the committee's decision to move from UK global equities to the climate aware fund. So that was really a strategy fund. That's probably going to have a bigger impact than just one disinvestment by Bailey Gifford in Royal Dutch Shell, which is only obviously one holding in a very diversified portfolio that you have yourself. And then it's also just engaging with other managers as well through the year. There's a lot more detail in part 2, and we can provide a little bit more of the numbers there. So I'll probably pick up a little bit more detail then, Robin, just so we can go into the nuts and bolts a little bit more at that stage.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Yeah, we may do that. Thank you.
Margaret?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just been muted. There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to have an idea. Do we actually do a pension fund, a members' pension fund newsletter at all? Because that would be one way to try to publicise the way we're moving towards better carbon, a better carbon footprint and climate awareness. And the other thing is, I just think we should publicise more that we have invested in the UBS Climate Aware Fund. The only thing is, you can't tell from these particular graphs how much reduction in the carbon footprint is really due to that. And I just wondered, you've just mentioned it, Sandy, and I'm sorry, I haven't yet double checked in part 2, but if there was a way of trying to attribute how much our carbon footprint has decreased due to actually that moving funds to the UBS Climate Aware Fund, that's what we were really after. That was what I thought the accountability after a year after that move was really going to be about.
Margaret, I suggest we have a chat about that in part 2.
Okay, but about the pension newsletter, do we do?
I think that's a good idea. I think we'll have to discuss that with Patrick at another time and find out what communications we do have currently running with our members and pension fund members and their employers, and see what we can do. But I think a point is a good one, and we'll need to take it up. And
that could then be a running. I mean, that will obviously be public as well, and we can actually then use it as Adam and I do get also quite a lot of emails from my residents about the pension fund and what we're.
Okay, I think given that Access provide or discussing at the moment a communication strategy, then I think it wouldn't be inappropriate if we did so. But perhaps Patrick, you'd put that on the list of things to be considered in the near future, how we are going to communicate with our members and our employers and the public and stakeholders, etc. So we'll bring that forward in the near future.
It's definitely on our list. Development of a communication strategy. We can communicate to some of the membership through the pensioners newsletter and some of the employer newsletters, so we can get some messages out to those groups. I think Adam's point was about the sort of wider stakeholders, such as some of these pressure groups or other interested parties who may not be receiving pensions or paying contributions into the fund, and we will need to look at how we communicate or get communications out to that wider audience.
Thanks, Patrick. Kevin O'Daly.
Hello, yeah, just to emphasise again, I think like everyone, I get quite a lot of pressure from various different groups insisting we should divest, and that's all there is to it. So anything positive that we can put out through Unison, through our social media, that would be brilliant. And obviously a lot of our members don't look at all the graphs and charts and just understand it. So as nice and simple as possible, that'd be just fantastic. Thanks, Kevin. I think it's very important. We forget that how many people are interested in what we do. And as Access have noted, a communication strategy is an essential a weapon in our arsenal, and we need to make sure that we use it appropriately. So thanks, Patrick, for bringing that forward at an appropriate time in the near future. Any other questions? Margaret.
Sorry, I forgot. There was one other thing. I'm just interested, and this is probably very difficult. It's a bit like what I do in epidemiology, which is what can you attribute to as causal? But in COVID, I have thought that actually there are quite a lot of companies that have been divesting out of fossil fuels, particularly the aeronautical industry and aircraft, and I just wondered whether there was a possible to analyse during COVID from March until January, this coming January, whether there was a way of seeing how much COVID had an effect on climate investments, you know, the carbon footprint, I guess.
I think we are. I don't think we're a research group, Margaret, and every time we ask Mercers to do something, it costs the pension fund money. So I'm rather reluctant to spend a lot of time analysing the market to the nth degree. What I'm more interested in, and I think if these graphs show it, is that our performance against benchmark performance, even though benchmark performance has been falling, our performance has been falling at a greater rate, and that whether that's because of the arrangements that we've made in the past, whether we've made good decisions in moving away from carbon effective funds, the fact that we are falling at a greater rate than the benchmark means that we are in a good position. So let's pick up some more detailed discussions in part two, because I can see everyone chafing at the bit to ask, you know, what did this decision do and what did that decision do? I'm not sure Mercers are going to be able to give us that. As I said, we'll see what we can and can't do in part two.
Okay, thank you. I think it's just looking at time, really, actually, in the end, and you know, we all know what's been going on, but
yeah. Okay. There isn't a recommendation in this in relation to this, except to say that we are now at a position where we need to move into part two.